Hi, I'm Eric Johns. I'm the senior pastor at Bethel Church here in Fairbanks, Alaska. And I wanted just to greet you personally and let you know that we're thrilled that you have found this video in hopes that it would be an encouragement to your spiritual journey. There may be lots of reasons why you're watching the video. Perhaps you're relocating, perhaps you're homesick or traveling or on the road. One thing that's really important to us is that this would be a supplement and not a replacement for coming to a church fellowship. God has been really gracious to not only save us from our sin, but to save us into the body of Christ. And church is a place where we come to fellowship with one another, to walk out our spiritual life together under the care and instruction of our pastors and elders. So I'm glad you found this content, and I hope to see you in church real soon. God bless.
I do hope that you have been enjoying our time in the book of James. It can be a bit of a hard book. James has a habit of getting right in our faces and getting into our lives and exposing areas that need correction. I was reading someone this week who was expressing their thankfulness for the book of James and all the ways that he spoke into the life of the Christian. They also said his favorite thing about the book of James is that it's only 5 chapters long. So if James has made you uncomfortable, we are getting close to the end, and that was entirely James's goal. And so I hope that it's been a good journey for you. Here's our question to get us pondering and thinking this morning. I want you to think back to when you were younger. Some of you, that may be harder than others, but I want you to think back to a time when you were young, and what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you have a singular career or focus in mind? How did you picture your life going as you dreamt of the future? I don't remember exactly when, but sometime it was around, I think, 4th or 5th grade, I had a writing assignment, and a teacher asked me to write about what I wanted to be when I was an adult. And being the brilliant, 10-year-old that I was, I remember writing that when I grew up, I wanted to be retired. So I think I went on to write that I would spend every day on the beach because I was retired, and I was pretty sure that that's what you did once you retired. So I will admit I am a little behind schedule. A bit of a disappointment to my 10-year-old self. I am still required to work regularly to pay the bills. So, but sometime after that, I finally did decide on a career that I was interested in, and that was architecture. I decided that I wanted to be an architect. And I don't know if any of you remember this, but we used to get these things called newspapers that came to our home every day. And the Fairbanks newspaper back in it was the early 90s. I don't know if there might be a few of you in here that remember this. It used to have a section that contained a home blueprint. It was on Sundays. I don't remember if it was every Sunday or once a month. And it had this blueprint home section in the Sunday paper. And I just remember being fascinated by the layouts of these houses, and I would just pore over them as I slowly ate my Lucky Charms, saving my marshmallows for last, because that's how you do it. And in between bites of high fructose corn syrup, I would mutter things like, "You can't have the main bathroom that far from the living room. It's just unpractical," to whoever was listening. My belief in my promising future as an architect persisted throughout high school. And I attended West Valley, where they offered drafting classes, and that seemed like a logical choice for an architectural prodigy like myself. And so I took my very first drafting class. And as it turns out, I hated drafting. I did not like it one bit, and my architectural career crashed out in the 10th grade in Mr. Johnson's drafting class. Just tragic. I could have revolutionized the world of architecture. I don't know how to put shorts on a building, but I would have tried, but I just didn't have what it took. I'd like to conduct a little survey in here with your help. Whatever came to mind when I said, what did you want to be when you grow up? How did you picture life playing out? Would you raise your hand if the eventual career path of your life is what you thought it would be when you were little? Okay, a handful, yeah? Okay, in a room of this size, that is not very many. Maybe for the rest of you, ask yourself, if If you ended up switching, what were some of the factors that led to that? Maybe it was a change of passion, or maybe you became aware of your own limitations, or maybe it just wasn't a good path for you. Maybe somebody in your life came in and spoke some guidance to you and directed you towards something different. Maybe you learned that your dream job didn't pay nearly as much as you thought that it should or would, and that changed the course of plans. We like to think that we're pretty good about predicting the future. If we're honest with ourselves, for the most part, we're really not. And not just about careers, that's certainly one element. Maybe it could be where you live. I certainly didn't still plan to be in Fairbanks. If you asked younger me, we're often wrong about whether we will get married or to whom, and not just the big stuff in life that we get it wrong. We have vacation plans that change or get altered. And I laughed at one book this week that said, your 5-day forecast for your life is wrong. You just don't know which part yet. We are generally horrible judges of how things will actually play out. But we act like we're good at it. Many of us walk through life with an unfounded confidence that we've got the steering wheel of life and things will go the way that we tell them to go. A number of years ago, one of my friends had their first child. And this was long enough ago that video game controllers required cords, okay? None of you newfangled wireless controller kids, but he would play video games in the living room on his PlayStation, and his son would watch. But when his son was like 3 or 4, he wanted to start playing with his dad. But no father really wants to play Madden football with their 4-year-old. They don't know how to blitz very well. It's pretty easy. So he would grab the spare controller, and instead of plugging it in, he actually would set it underneath the PlayStation and hand the controller to his son, who thought that he was controlling the game. Some years later, he did figure out, he got smart enough to realize that his controller wasn't actually doing anything. We're going to look at the end of James chapter 4 this morning if you want to turn there. And it has to do with the control that we think that we have in our life and over the future. And James highlights to them, and will highlight to us, that they aren't in control of their own lives and their futures any more than that 4-year-old was in control of the football players in the video game with the cord that wasn't plugged in. We act like we're playing, we act like we're in control, but in reality, our cord is unplugged and we don't even know it yet. Here's what it says, James chapter 4, picking up in verse 13, going through verse 17. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to the city, to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes, and all such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. So he starts out with, now listen. Hey, seriously, come on now, pay attention. You need to hear this. He goes on, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that city and spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. What James is saying is that we believe the myth that we are in control. And James tells it to us straight, whether we like it or not. You are less consequential than you think. What is your life, he asks, and I'll tell you the answer is not encouraging. You are mist, you are vapor, you are smoke. You're here one moment and gone the next. If you were here this winter, maybe you remember, we had a little bit of a cold one. Dropped a little bit, right? Has anyone here ever done the boiling water at 40 below outside thing where you throw it up in the air? Yeah. If you haven't, you boil water and you throw it up in the air at 40 below and it just magically disappears. If James was writing from Fairbanks and not Jerusalem, that's how he would describe you. Mist is not a compliment. James seems more concerned that you view yourself accurately than he is about your self-esteem. And he's pointing out the reality of three things in this section: that we are fleeting, forgettable, and fragile. You are fleeting. When we were young, life seems so long. Everything cool is a future away. Once you start to put a few decades in the rearview mirror, you start to see how fast life truly glows. I've heard it said that when you're a child, time crawls. When you're in college, time walks. When you're a new parent, time runs. And when you're older, time flies. When you hit retirement, it vanishes. Life begins to feel like a treadmill where the speed just keeps increasing. People reflect back near the end and go, where did the time go? It feels like I just started. We aren't around nearly as long as we think that we are. We are fleeting. We are forgettable. Not calling you boring. We hope to maybe leave behind a legacy and to be expected that we would be remembered, we hope, but will we? Just as an experiment, raise your hand if you could right now, if you could name every one of your great-grandfathers. Okay, a couple, right? We are forgettable. I wasn't expecting very many hands. I knew the question. I couldn't even raise my hand, right? We are forgettable. And we are fragile. See, as a teenager, many of us concluded that we were invincible. We jumped off things like we were invincible. We drove like we were invincible. That part of your brain that calculates risks and reward that doesn't fully develop until around age 25, maybe more for some of you, but some of us made the most out of every moment that we had until it did, right? But then moments in life come along that force you to consider your own mortality. I remember being in my early 20s for the first time going to a funeral for somebody my own age. We have amazing bodies and they can do amazing things and you can cut yourself and it can heal and yet you encounter the wrong bacteria or virus, take the wrong step, or simply be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it can all end so suddenly. We are fragile. People around us are fragile. There isn't a single person in this room whose life can't be instantly altered by your cell phone ringing in your pocket right now. We are mist, interacting with lots of other mist. But despite all of those realities, we still think that we are in control. James is writing to businessmen of his day who had confident plans of what would happen in the future. He says they tried to control when things would happen. We'll do them today or tomorrow. Tried to control the places that they would go. We'll go to this city or that city. They assumed that they were in control of what would happen when we would get there. We're going to get there and we're going to carry on and make some money. See, we've got a bad habit of making plans as if we are God, like we are in control. And some of you in here are planners. You would consider that a feature and not a flaw. The Bible is not opposed to you being a planner. The Bible is not opposed to you planning. If you have been putting money into a retirement plan with the intention of spending it when you're much older, perhaps going to the beach, I've heard, that's okay. If you purchased a home and you're now committed for the next 30 years to paying a mortgage, causing you to keep working, that's okay. If you're making plans to go to Hawaii this January in case it's 50 below again, that's okay. And I hope to see you there, right? In fact, many places throughout scriptures, planning is commended. The book of Proverbs says, in fact, to not plan is foolish and lazy. Proverbs routinely points us to thoughtful planning and wise preparation and says, if you do not plan, you are the fool. So the problem with James is not with planning, it's with the posture and the heart behind the planning. It's with our presumption of control. It's with the priority that we place in our plans of our own pleasures and ideas, not being as concerned with what God would have for us. James is warning us about going through life, living, planning, working, recreating, resting, all that we do like we're the only ones that should have any say on how we use our time. When you draw up in your mind your tomorrow and the days after, is God foundational to those plans, or is he merely an afterthought? Verse 15, instead you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. We would be wise to live in the reality that God is in control. Everything we do, everything we accomplish, everything we achieve is ultimately under the sovereign will of God. He is omniscient. He is omnipotent. He is omnipresent. We would be wise to recognize him as the greater and us as the lesser. In this entire room, there is not a single one of us who truly knows what's going to happen tomorrow, if we will have a tomorrow. But we live as if we do. And we often do it with little regard for the God who genuinely does know. Now, maybe you can conclude that God is in control. There's actually two ways that we can misapply this reality in our own lives. If we say God is in control, one thing that can go wrong is we can fall into a passive fatalism in our minds that says, well, God has determined everything, so I'm just going to sit back and do nothing and see what he decides to do. God's in control. I have to do nothing. And we can't read James and come to that conclusion because it's full of plenty of commands, plenty of actions. It's a letter of verbs telling you to do stuff. And yes, God is in control, but I think he finds it much easier to steer a moving ship than one that's sitting dead in the water just waiting for him to act. A second misapplication of this truth is that we can treat this verse as if it was just a matter of reciting a formula, mindlessly repeating, if it's the Lord's will, whenever discussing plans or putting something on the calendar. I can still do what I want. I just need to say the magic formula and slap God's blessing on the plans that I figured out without him. Don't you think God knows? You know that doesn't work, right? I think we see a good example of what it looks like to live as if God is in control in the life of the Apostle Paul. Listen to how he talked. In Acts 18, he told the Ephesians that he wanted to stay longer with them, and he responded back, but I will come back if the Lord wills it. 1 Corinthians, he's writing to his friends there. He wants to come to them. He says, I will come to you very soon if the Lord is willing. We see this a willingness in Paul to modify his plans as God opened and closed doors, both of countries and of jail cells. And Paul was a person that talked about his life, and he used the word shipwreck plurally, right? If you know the story of Paul. I think that's a man that knew that he wasn't in charge nearly as much as he thought that he was. I imagine when Paul's making plans and there's water involved, he knew those were tentative plans. I write those ones in pencil, right? Because see, if the Lord wills isn't a catchphrase, it's looking at life with wisdom, understanding who is truly in control. Proverbs 16:9, in their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. So what should we do? How should we live? Should we just be too scared to plan anything? Only make travel plans that are 100% refundable, or be flaky and not commit to anything because I'm just trying to follow God's plans for my life and I don't want to be presumptuous? I think we see two things that are important here in verse 16 and 17. We are to plan with humility and follow God where he leads. Verse 16, as it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such planning is evil. Plan with humility. He says, you boast in your arrogant schemes. You think they're going to play out your way. There are people in here who are control freaks that are trying to white knuckle life to fit into their vision of perfection. That might be you. You're going to get what you want and nothing is going to stop you. You think you're in control. And if that is you, it sounds exhausting. There's a scene from one of the Marvel movies. I was corrected. First service, I said Avengers. Turns out it was Captain America Civil War, where Captain America is trying to stop a helicopter from taking off of a roof. And so he grabs onto the base of the helicopter and some metal on the roof. And as it tries to fly away, he's being pulled in two directions. And much like myself, his muscles are bulging in this scene. I had to go with the baggy shirt today so I didn't show off, you know? And you know in this scene that any lapse in concentration and it all falls apart, it all unravels. Life becomes a house of cards just waiting to collapse if you're the one holding it together, but you're not gonna let it. And you're exhausted. Or maybe you have bought into the worldly wisdom of what the good life is supposed to look like. Carpe diem, seize the day, seize tomorrow while you're at it. You just want the good life. Is that really a bad thing? You just need enough of God's blessing to get there. So you hope for some, if it's the Lord's will, sprinkles that you can put on your plans. That you've already locked in, you're not gonna let anything change your course. Now, God's not actually on your planning committee. You just actually want his rubber stamp of approval to feel better about what you decided to do anyway. See, our faith and our trust in God is to be the central theme that runs throughout our entire lives, impacting all that we do. But too many of us, we tend to put life into these little boxes. This is my work over here, and this is my family over here, and this is my faith over here. Here's what I do with my time, and here's what I do with my friends. If I have a little bit left over, then that, maybe I'll give it to God on his behalf. See, what might it look like to truly trust God with your future instead of trusting yourself? James says, you boast in your arrogant schemes. It says, we hold on to our futures like this, with a closed fist. That is arrogant schemes. James tells us, hold on to your plans like this with an open hand, and says that is if the Lord wills. James says God has the right to change your plans. God has the right to upset your plans if he deems fit. God's plans are better than your plans. If you've spent time in your Bibles over the years, just think of the different instances where God totally changes the trajectory of somebody's life as he sees fit. Moses, think of the story and life of Moses, had some struggles growing up in an adopted family. Ended up getting himself in a fight and then running away, starting a life in a faraway land, never intending to return. Until he stumbled upon a strangely burning bush that started talking to him. Not long after that, he finds himself in a confrontation with the most powerful man in the known world of the time, Pharaoh. David, we studied David last winter, the annoying little brother that didn't get anything cool that his older brothers got to do, like go to war. He was more of an afterthought to his father. But then, by God's grace, he becomes anointed the future king. And now things are looking up. He becomes the national hero. Women sing songs about him when he comes near them in their town. Maybe he concludes this following God thing ain't too shabby. And his fame and notoriety now make him the arch nemesis of the current king. And this leads to multiple murder attempts. And that's just the beginning of his complicated life. Or maybe the apostle Paul, the try-hard that learned under the cool rabbi. He was basically in Jerusalem Ivy League. He was the man that could get things done. He was the man that was willing to go wherever was needed to do the job. That is until a work trip to Damascus left him blind and lost with more than a few questions to answer about this Jesus guy. God is in control. And James says, but we boast in our arrogant schemes. Stop holding on to your plans like you really know what's going to happen and that you really know what's best. But with humility, see where God is leading you, where God would want you to go, open-handed, pursuing what he wants as he guides you. How do we do that? Verse 17, we learn to follow God. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. James calls us to follow the clearly revealed will of God. He says to not do so is sin. See, we normally tend to think of sin in terms of what we would call sins of commission, doing what God has said not to do. God says do not lie. God says do not covet, and that's how we view sins. Don't do the bad things. James reminds us that there are sins of omission, disregarding what God has clearly commanded us to do. This is where we get things like love your neighbor. Look out for widows and orphans and those who are vulnerable. Be generous, be joyful, and so on. So much of our mindset about sins is just try not to do the naughty stuff. We think that if we mostly avoid the bad, that's all we kind of really need to worry about as Christians, thinking that we can kind of keep God on the sidelines, living life as we see fit, assuming that God's up there just happy we're not cheating on our taxes, right? James makes the point that that's not good enough. See, there are so many things that God has called us to as his followers. Not just are you not doing the bad stuff, but are you doing the good things that he has called us to? Are you doing the things that you know you should be doing? Are we really being who God calls us to be? I could go to a lot of different directions here. Just one example came to mind of one of these things that God has told us to do, but I think as Christians often gets ignored. Hospitality is a virtue that it is both commanded and commended throughout Scripture, but I would say that it is a forgotten value for many Christians today. Some of the fun, I don't know if you have been watching this year, the World Cup. Some of the fun has been having foreigners visit the United States for the first time. There's been some funny clips going online of people trying ranch dressing for the first time or Southern barbecue, and they've gone viral, and it's been a lot of fun. One of the clips that has circulated was a European guy driving through the neighborhoods, I believe he was in Texas, looking at American houses, their size and their majesty, and just marveling that a single family would live there. See, as a country, we have developed a culture that has the largest houses, which are the least shared with others around us. As a Christian, when you were deciding where to live, did you take hospitality into consideration? Because God has called us to be hospitable. Is your home a fortress or a ministry launching pad? Does your home and the way that you use it reflect God's call in the life of a Christian to be hospitable? Is it used to welcome strangers, to help widows and orphans, to be a place to break bread and build community? See, hospitality is more than just dinner parties. It's inviting others into our lives, sharing with others what God has so generously shared with us. I could have picked a lot of different, hospitality as one example of that. There are things that God has clearly called us to as his followers that we just ignore. There are areas of our lives where we have let worldly wisdom steer us towards decisions and values that don't reflect what it means to be a follower of Jesus. What is something good that God has called you to that you have just let drift to the back burner? See, we tend to think about God with all the big questions in life, the big stuff in life, but in reality, he's more concerned with the type of person you are day to day. And as we follow him each day and the stuff that he has called us to, that is where we find the truest freedom. Maybe you just have some confusion about what it means to follow God. Maybe you want to trust God, but maybe you grew up hearing about God's will in a way that kind of paralyzed you from following it because you didn't understand it. I know when I was growing up, it was kind of a common conversation amongst teenagers. I just want to find God's will from my life. I'm just trying to figure out God's will. I remember coming to the conclusion that I had to find the one path out there that was the right path if I ever wanted to make God happy. The problem is when we view God's will as a single path that we have to pick from the thousands of other paths out there, where we turn following God into a choose-your-own-adventure book, hoping to stay inside God's hidden will that he doesn't want us to find out about for some reason, believing that if we get one decision wrong, we're doomed to spend the rest of our lives in futility and frustration. That's not following God's will. But when we teach it like that, it puts pressure on people's backs. Better go to the right university or you'll mess it all up. Better pick the right career or major or you'll mess it all up. Better date and marry the one right person that God has put out there for you or you'll mess it all up. And God having a plan for you moves from being a joyful idea to an elephant on your shoulders, filling us with fear and anxiety for every decision we make, worrying that it's going to be the wrong one and take us outside of God's will. Or maybe you talk to other Christians who believe that following God's will was only possible if we went and did the types of things we would never want to do. The only way to follow God's will was to move to a part of the world without running water and be a missionary where people didn't know God. Many assumed that meant following God's will was going and living in sub-Saharan Africa, and that was the only thing that God had in mind if you truly loved him. Which seems a little short-sighted to conclude that the only place that God can send you that didn't have running water and where people didn't know God was Africa, because I think that describes huge sections of Fairbanks, right? Maybe we're here already. The people feared that God's will, because they thought the only way to make God happy was for us to be incredibly miserable in the life that he's given us. And that was a sign that we loved him enough. That's not the point that James is making. Again, James is asking, what does the way that you think about the future reveal the state of your heart? See, when you look at how you use your time each week, is it all about you? Or are you investing time in others, serving others? When you make your budget, plan your spending, is it you focused about your pleasures, your vacations, your priorities? Or are you investing in God's priorities, things that are eternal, things that last? This quote got my attention. It says this: "For all our profession of Christian faith, once the calendars come out, it's as if God is no longer there. When it comes to planning, we can so quickly become atheists. Our planning revolves around us and our self-important agendas." See, the Bible tells us that the 24 hours in a day are not mine to just use as I plead. God has given them to me and I am to use them as he would have me. And James wants to dig into our lives and leave no stone unturned. What are some assumptions that you hold about the future that you didn't learn from God and his word? Where have you let worldly wisdom dictate your priorities and values? What might it look like to follow him, not just with segments of your life, but to live out what he calls us to as Christians? I'll finish with a quote from Kevin DeYoung's book called Just Do Something, has the subtitle, A Liberating Approach to Finding God's Will. It's a good read. He says this: "Live for God. Obey the scriptures. Think of others before yourself. Be holy and love Jesus. And as you do these things, do whatever else you like, with whomever you like, wherever you like, and you will be walking in the will of God." Yeah, we want to follow God with the big stuff, but it starts by following God in the little stuff, in the day-to-day stuff, and the stuff that's right in front of us. We're called to walk with him each day, trusting him and him alone for our tomorrow, to live humbly, holding tomorrow with an open hand, and follow where God has clearly led us so far and where God will continue to lead us, and trust that he knows what he's doing. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. I pray that it would be a guide to us of the things that you call us to, of what it looks like to be your followers. Lord, not just to avoid the bad stuff, not just to avoid the mud puddle and not step in the muck, but Lord, to be who you called us to be. The various attributes and attitudes that it looks like to be a follower of yours. Lord, help us to make plans humbly. Not to be scared of the future and not to be scared to act, but Lord, to make plans but hold them open-handed. Trust that you are in control and trust that you will lead us and guide us as you see fit. Help us, Lord, to pursue the things that you would have us pursue, not just pursue things that benefit us or fill us with pleasure or whatever it is that we're looking for. Heavenly Father, help us to really trust you. It's not easy. We need your help. Amen.